right there, traveler. What a lovely surprise to see you at the doorstep tonight. Come in, come in. Don't let the rain catch you out there. The lanterns are glowing low. The hearth is warm, and our little inn is just beginning to settle into the rhythm of evening. Have you eaten something comforting today? Had a moment to just sit and listen to the sky? Was there anything unusual about your day? Any curious thoughts, odd dreams? Or moments of stillness that stuck to your sleeve like cobweb? Well, no matter. You're here now, and that's more than enough. Welcome back to the inn, where soft thunder taps the roof, and the piano hums in the background like an old friend. This is your quiet little corner of the night, a place where all Lu Koch, our gentle wanderers, can rest, stretch their feet toward the fire, and listen to tales told slowly, like soup warming on a sleepy stove. Tonight, as the candlelight flickers and the rain drizzles softly down the windows, we're going to drift into a story about weaving. Yes, thread looms fabric, and the sorts of dramas you'd expect from the gods of Olympus when someone dares to challenge them over a skill so delicate. And before you dismiss it, oh, weaving, how quaint, let me warn you. You probably wouldn't have survived a single loom duel in ancient Greece. The rules were unwritten, the egos massive, and the consequences, well, poetic. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That's the only rule at this inn. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it in your part of the world? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle in quietly, the wooden floor creaking beneath your steps as the door clicks shut behind you. The smell of damp wool tea, leaves, and candle wax wraps around you like a worn blanket. There's only one other guest this evening, a figure dozing with their hood tipped over their face, a half-empty cup of something steaming nearby. The innkeeper spots you and grins. They beckon you to a seat near the fire. We were just about to begin, they whisper, voice low and warm. Tonight, it's a tale of pride, thread, and gods who take their embroidery far too seriously. And so the room hushes. The piano continues its gentle wandering. The fire lets out a small sigh. You close your eyes for a moment. Then the tale begins. It starts not with Athena, not even with Mount Olympus, but with a little village in ancient Lydia, far from the marble temples and golden thrones you might expect. No, this was a place of dye vats and sheep shears, where the smell of indigo clung to every robe, and women sang as they spun wool into long, careful threads. There, in a house shaded by fig trees and overgrown roses, lived a young woman named Arachne. Not a princess, not a priestess, just a girl with astonishing hands. She could weave a story into silk faster than the eye could follow. While others struggled with knots and frayed ends, Arachne's cloth came out smooth, as cloud mist and full of secret details. Little birds tucked into corners, gods hidden behind curtains of thread animals mid-laugh. People began to whisper that she'd been touched by the divine. But Arachne laughed when they said that. No god taught me, she'd say, threading her shuttle through the loom. I learned from my mother and her mother before her. The gods know war and thunder and vanity, not thread, which, as you might imagine, was not a sentiment the gods appreciated. Still, Lydia buzzed with talk of her talent. Strangers traveled from across the region just to watch her work, like watching music be born from fingertips. She'd let children sit beside her loom, give them soft bits of thread to play with. But when someone mentioned that Athena herself was the goddess of weaving, and perhaps Arachne owed her thanks, she'd only smile, too sweet, too sharp. If Athena wants to prove herself, she said once, she's welcome to challenge me. And that, dear listener, is how the gods start listening. Not when you worship, but when you dare. You open your eyes again, Or maybe you never closed them, and now the rain has changed tempo, a steadier rhythm against the inn's tiled roof. The fire crackles once more, and the innkeeper continues the tale like they've told it 100 times, always on nights just like this. Imagine the land of Lydia, not the grand roaring cities of Athens or Rome, but a quieter countryside where the hills are dusty and ripe with fig and almond trees, and the mornings begin with the sound of women beating linen on stones by the river. This is where Arachne was born. Her father was Idmon, a humble dyer of wool. He had no divine lineage, no tragic backstory, just permanently stained fingertips and a nose for color. His specialty was Tyrian purple, made from the glands of a rather unfortunate sea snail. Imagine harvesting that. Historians still argue whether Lydia at that time was under direct influence of the Greek pantheon, or whether older Anatolian customs still persisted. But one thing is certain, it was a place where fiber was a family's livelihood, and thread in the hands of the skilled became magic. From a young age, Arachne watched her father stir the dye vats, his arms deep in steaming crimson and violet. Her small hands mimicked the motions with scraps of yarn. She didn't need books, there were no weaving manuals. Only instinct and hours spent watching the women of her village sitting cross-legged looms, balanced on knees, hands moving like waves. And she surpassed them quickly. By the time she was 14, her work outshone that of the elders. Her patterns were symmetrical to the thread. Her colors held subtle gradients, as if the cloth itself breathed. She could make lions roar in wool, make grapevines curl up from a hem. People came to buy, yes, but more came to gape. And like any story where a mortal becomes a little too extraordinary, you know what's coming. Rumors began to spin softly at first. "They say she works without pause," whispered an old woman in the market. "She must pray at night," said another. "No human hands are that swift." "But she says she's self-taught," replied a boy. "She doesn't even keep a statue of Athena." And that, dear listener, was unusual. Because in that time, even if you weren't particularly devout, you didn't challenge tradition. Every spinner offered their first thread to the gods. Every weaver whispered thanks to the goddess before snipping the final piece. Not Arachne. She worked in silence. Or rather, not in prayer, but in humming. Quiet little songs she made up verses about the moon, or goats, or how dye stained your fingers for days. Can you picture her there barefoot in a cotton dress smudged with dye, a long braid over one shoulder, sitting by an open window as her loom clacked away? She isn't thinking about Olympus. She's thinking about the pattern, about how a line of sheep could curl around a border, how to tuck a story about fish into a tunic's hem. A merchant once asked her for a tapestry of Zeus throwing thunderbolts. She declined. "I don't weave drama," she said, "just things people know." And maybe that's what the gods didn't like. Because woven into the simplicity of her work was something dangerous honesty. She didn't flatter. She didn't stitch divine grandeur into every corner. She wove what she saw. People laughing, slipping, arguing, sneezing. The world as it was, which in a place where gods demanded tribute and myth reigned supreme, was a quietly scandalous thing. One afternoon, a priestess visited from a neighboring temple and offered Arachne a small statue of Athena to place above her loom. A gift, she said. Arachne thanked her politely and set it on a shelf. By the next day, it had fallen into a basket of leftover thread. The gods were watching now, and they were very, very curious. The storm outside grows a touch louder, or maybe your ears are just more tuned to it now, the way it softens and swells like breath through a curtain. The innkeeper leans a little closer to the fire, and their voice drops mellow and slow. Because if you're going to understand the rest of this tale, you'll need to remember one thing: gods never forget being insulted. Not once. Not even over something as seemingly delicate as a thread. Especially not over thread. In the ancient world, weaving wasn't just a chore for the hearth or a quiet pastime like it might seem now. It was how civilization displayed power, identity, and story. To control the thread was to shape what people remembered. The Greek gods knew this. That's why they didn't just dabble in thunderbolts and transformations, they were spinners too. Let's start with the fates. The Moirai, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. One spun the thread of life, one measured it, and one snipped it. You wouldn't want them anywhere near your birthday party. Then there was Athena, goddess of war wisdom, and weaving. A curious combination, but not as strange as it sounds. War and weaving both involve strategy, precision, and knowing when to cut. Athena's loom didn't just produce cloth, it produced symbols of civilization. Historians still argue whether Athena's association with weaving came before or after her role as a war deity. Was it her domestic side meant to soften her edge? Or was it the Greeks reminding themselves that even comfort came through control? Either way, her tapestries weren't just pretty wall hangings. They were political statements, divine propaganda embroidered in gold. And if someone, say a young mortal girl from Lydia, started making tapestries of equal or greater beauty without once thanking the goddess, well, it wouldn't go unnoticed. Even among the other gods, Athena was known to have a certain, shall we say, prideful streak. Calm on the surface, but lightning under the skin. A smile that could melt bronze. And then to make things worse, Arachne's themes grew bolder. She didn't weave heroic myths. She didn't recreate noble deeds. Her most famous piece, the one that brought pilgrims to her door, was a simple village scene, a woman arguing with her goat. No gods, no monsters, just a woman scolding livestock, as the goat stared back with equal stubbornness. But the detail, the goat's expression, the wrinkles at the woman's eyes, the spilled basket of lentils, it was absurd, funny, and real. And it whispered something dangerous, that human life was worth immortalizing. That daily struggle, that smallness could be more honest than divine grandeur. The old gods had woven mortals into cloth before, yes, but always as cautionary tales or pawns. Arachne wove them as equals. Word of this reached temples. Priests muttered. Patrons frowned. Offerings to Athena dipped in certain towns, coincidentally or not. And somewhere in a still grove where the wind doesn't dare blow, Athena heard. She didn't throw a thunderbolt. She didn't send a plague of itchy wool. No. Athena wasn't petty. But she was interested. And that in Olympus is almost worse. Picture the gods around their golden hearth wine in one hand, gossip in the other. Hermes probably smirking behind his goblet. Apollo pretending not to care. Hera perhaps raising a brow. And Athena unmoved, calm as a pond. "I'll visit her," she said eventually, "just to see." Now, whether this was just as curiosity or the first hint of jealousy, well, historians still debate that. Some say Athena wanted to teach Arachne humility. Others say she hoped the girl might prove herself worthy. And a few, the ones who whisper more than they write, believe Athena wanted just for once to meet someone who could match her thread for thread. But gods don't just show up with divine fanfare. They send omens, they stir dreams, they walk the earth in disguise. And on a particular morning, in a village full of dye and looms and gossip, a strange old woman knocked on Arachne's door. You shift a little in your seat near the fire blanket tugged over your legs as the innkeeper sets down their teacup with a soft clink. Now this, they say with a wink, is where the story tightens like thread on a fresh warp. Because while gods may stew in silence and hover in clouds, mortals rarely know when to stop bragging. Arachne, now around 17, had grown into her confidence like ivy around a fence, thick, clinging, and everywhere. Her weaving was beyond extraordinary. People didn't just admire it, they felt seen by it. And she noticed. Oh yes, she noticed. It's one thing to be good at something, another to have every neighbor, merchant, and traveler bow their head and whisper, "She's better than a goddess." So when the question inevitably came, "Who taught you such skill?" Arachne didn't hesitate. "I taught myself," she said, winding fresh yarn around a shuttle. No divine gifts, no golden thread, no Olympus behind the loom. A woman nearby gasped. Someone else dropped a spindle. Another muttered, "You should offer thanks to Athena." But Arachne simply raised an eyebrow. If Athena thinks herself the better weaver, she's welcome to prove it. And there it was. A challenge, spoken aloud. In a culture where words had weight and gods had ears, the old woman appeared not long after. No lightning, no trumpets, just a knock on the door and the shuffle of sandals on dirt. She was hunched, wrapped in a faded blue Himation hair silver as storm clouds. Her eyes were sharp despite the wrinkles, and her voice held a softness that didn't quite match her posture. "My dear," she said, "you are gifted, but you walk a dangerous path. There are things mortals are not meant to challenge." Arachne didn't look up from her loom. Her fingers continued moving as if possessed. Should I bow for being better? Should I pretend my skill belongs to someone else? The old woman stepped inside, brushing past baskets of dyed yarn. Humility is not weakness. You still have time to offer Athena thanks. She might forgive your pride. Arachne chuckled, sharp and clear. I see. Another priestess then. Go tell your goddess I'll meet her at the loom. I don't fear her hands. The air in the room shifted then. Heavier, warmer, almost buzzing like the instant before a thunderclap. And the old woman stood taller, straighter, too straight. Her shawl fell from her shoulders like a shed skin. Her gray hair shimmered into gold. Her robes rethreaded themselves into celestial cloth, woven with olive branches, owl feathers, and patterns only the stars understood. Arachne froze. Her shuttle clattered to the ground. The goddess Athena stood before her ageless and composed eyes like flint under snow. I accept your challenge, she said. Now let's take a moment, you and I, to breathe. Can you imagine the tension in that tiny room? The weight of divine presence next to clay jars of dye and a humble wooden loom. Arachne's pride had summoned a storm, and now it stood across from her, ready to weave. Yet she didn't faint, didn't cry. She bent, picked up her shuttle, and cleared her loom. Then let's begin, she said, and let the thread speak for itself. Historians still argue whether the competition happened in full view of others or behind closed doors, witnessed only by household cats and nervous ghosts. Some say it lasted hours, others say days. One rather poetic version claims the sun itself paused to watch, but all agree no one had ever seen two looms sing like that. You sit a little deeper now, sinking into the chair's soft arms, the reins slipping into a gentler rhythm again, as if even the storm outside is leaning in to listen. The innkeeper stirs the fire with a long iron poker, sending up a quiet shower of sparks, then continues the tale. The challenge had been issued. But before the looms began their duet of pride and precision, let's linger just a moment longer in that delicate hush, the space between the spoken dare and the first thrown shuttle. Because while we know the old woman was Athena in disguise, Arachne did not at first. Even before her transformation, there had been something a little off about the old woman. The way she moved, not slowly, but deliberately. As if she wasn't old, but simply borrowing the movements of someone who was. Her gaze, too, had flicked around the room, like someone memorizing every seam of a garment not their own. She had touched the loom with reverence, yes, but also familiarity. Like someone who had built one from scratch. Your warp tension is remarkable, she'd murmured. Tighter than temple looms in Corinth. Arachne had snorted. Temple looms favor drama over clarity. The old woman had smiled at that. And you favor clarity over flattery. I favor truth, Arachne said a bit too quickly. But was it truth she wove, or pride? Or something in between, the curious rebellion of a mortal who wanted to create beauty on her own terms, without divine fingerprints smudging the edges? Here's the thing about gods, especially in the old stories, they rarely walk into a mortal's life unannounced. There are always warnings, little glitches. Perhaps the dye in Arachne's vat bubbled too hot that morning, though the fire was low. Perhaps the neighborhood cats all fled her doorstep. Or maybe a strand of golden thread appeared in her stash. Too fine, too warm, before dissolving into smoke. But mortals rarely notice these things until they're far, far behind them. So when the old woman stood in her little home, suggesting gently, even kindly, that Arachne reconsider her tone, it wasn't a threat. Not yet. It was the last chance to back away from the cliff. Some versions of the myth say that Athena truly hoped Arachne would relent, that she offered her that final conversation, not out of pride, but something close to mercy. Others say the goddess simply enjoyed the theater of it all. One thing is certain, Arachne was unmoved, and so the old woman let the illusion fall. There was no lightning flash, no sudden roar. Only a breath, a shimmer in the air like hot wind over a pond. The disguise melted away, and Athena stood, revealed tall, elegant, armorless, yet powerful, a gleaming spiral of olive green cloth and celestial embroidery catching the light. Even her presence wove something into the space stillness order gravity. The way a perfectly threaded loom makes no sound until it's touched. She looked around the room. No priestly symbols, no owl carvings. only thread and work, and that unmistakable mortal defiance still hanging like steam. "I've heard your name," she said softly, "and now I've seen your work." Arachne bowed, not deeply, but enough. Whether it was out of reverence or readiness, even she wasn't sure. "You may choose the theme," Athena offered, gesturing to the looms. Arachne's fingers twitched. "Very well," she said. "Let it be a contest of storytelling." And with that, the challenge began. 2 looms side by side. One goddess, one girl. Both threading not just yarn, but memory pride and warning into the cloth. No bystanders, no judges. Only the rhythm of wood and string and the quiet breath between shuttles. You can almost hear it now, can't you? Thwip, thwip, clack, thwip, thwip, clack. One weaving glory, the other truth. The fire glows lower now, just embers tucked into ash like glowing pearls. The piano in the next room hums a little slower, as though even the melody is listening. You feel the story settle into something quieter, but sharper, like a needle in thread just before it pulls. The 2 looms stood side by side. You can imagine it, can't you, Athena and Arachne, neither speaking, neither blinking, each woman staring at her own blank web of threads. And then, movement. Athena's shuttle flew first. As goddess of wisdom, her every gesture had centuries behind it. Her tapestry unfolded swiftly and smoothly. Images burst into color as she wove. In the center, she placed herself, radiant and armored, emerging from the head of Zeus. Around her danced scenes of divine triumph, Poseidon yielding Athens to her Hermes, inventing the lyre mortals praying with open hands. In each corner, she wove mortals who had defied gods and suffered. Niobe turned to stone, Pentheus torn by madness. The colors were heavenly, threads that shimmered like starlight borders edged in olive leaves. The craftsmanship was beyond flawless. It was divine order spun into silk. Now Arachne, no shimmer, no celestial gleam. But her hands moved just as fast, maybe faster. And where Athena's work inspired awe, Arachne's inspired discomfort. She wove the gods, yes, but not in their glory, in their mischief. There was Zeus transforming into a swan to seduce Leda, Poseidon chasing a nymph in the form of a stallion, Apollo mocking Cassandra after she refused his advances. Each scene was stitched with extraordinary precision. Not crude, not disrespectful, just honest. Too honest. The gods weren't monstrous, but they weren't noble either. They were selfish, foolish, petty. And the message of Arachne's tapestry was clear. The gods do not always deserve their altars. Now pause for a moment, traveler. Imagine sitting in that small room. No thunder, no flames. Just 2 looms. One woven with tales of divine justice. The other with tales of divine hypocrisy. A quiet, beautiful rebellion. Historians still argue whether Arachne meant to insult Athena directly or merely point out uncomfortable truths. Some say it was bravery. Others say it was youthful foolishness. But what no one denies is that her work was perfect. The borders were cleaner than Athena's, her lines smoother, her images more human. When both tapestries were finished, the room was utterly silent. Even the gods might have held their breath. Athena stood, her eyes swept over Arachne's work. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The tapestry had said everything, and that, dear traveler, is when the thread began to snap. The fire has dimmed to a sleepy orange glow, and somewhere behind the walls of the old inn, a shutter creaks gently in the wind. You feel the shift, don't you? The hush that settles just before something changes, before thread pulls too tight and finally breaks. Athena stared at the tapestry, not for its insolence, not for the sharpness of its message, but because, and this was the hardest truth of all, it was perfect. Flawless in composition, color, detail. Honest in a way no god had dared to be about themselves. The goddess's lips pressed together. No words, just silence. And then she moved. Some versions of the myth say Athena tore the tapestry from the loom in one furious motion, shredding the threads as if they had personally offended Olympus. Others say she touched it only once, and it unraveled on its own, as if the truth could not hold its shape under divine scrutiny. But what all the old tellings agree upon is this. Athena turned her eyes to Arachne, and they were full of something stranger than anger. Disappointment. maybe even sorrow. Because Arachne had matched her, thread for thread, pattern for pattern, and that could not be allowed. There is an open question among scholars, still debated over dusty scrolls and late-night lectures, whether Athena's next act was punishment or mercy. She reached out not with thunder, but with a fingertip, touched Arachne's forehead, and in that instant the mortal girl collapsed, silent, pale, curled around her own knees, like a ball of thread too tightly wound. The goddess spoke finally. "Live on, little weaver," she said, but not as a girl. And before the fire could die out, before Arachne could draw another breath, her limbs began to shift. Her fingers stretched, her skin rippled, her spine curved. In moments, she had become something else entirely. A spider, tiny, dark, and spinning silk from her very own body. The first of her kind. Arachne scurried across the broken frame of her loom and began to weave again. No tears, no protests. Just the soft, rhythmic sound of a new thread pulling into being. Historians still argue whether this was a curse or a strange kind of gift. Did Athena spare her out of respect, or doom her to weave forever in a form too small for glory? You, dear traveler, must decide for yourself. But picture her now, if you will. Not as a girl, not even as a spider, but as a thread always pulled, always spinning, always telling the truth in silk no one quite understands. The room feels quieter now. The wind has settled outside the rain, reduced to a misty patter, like distant fingers on parchment. You glance at the fire. It's low, barely a flicker. The kind of glow that feels more memory than light. The innkeeper leans back with a sigh voice growing softer, almost like a lullaby. Because though the tale of Arachne's transformation might sound like the end, it wasn't. Not really. You see, gods may reshape the body, but the spirit, the will behind the weaving, is a different kind of thread. Arachne did not disappear. She simply continued. Not as a girl in linen, no, but as something smaller, quieter, and infinitely more patient. Her silk was not dyed in Tyrian purple or edged in golden threads, but it shimmered just the same in the morning sun. And though no temple would ever display her work, it clung to trees, to rooftops, to corners of quiet rooms, story after story, spun in fragile lace. Even the gods, it said, learned to walk more carefully in her presence. Now let's take a step back. Let's follow that thread as it winds through time. The ancient Greeks began calling spiders arachnids after her. Her name became a genus, a symbol. Even as her story was told and retold, whispered from scroll to scroll, her legend stuck sticky and fine as silk. Women at their looms in Delphi would mutter her name when their tension went awry. Weavers in Alexandria told her story to apprentices as a caution and an inspiration. Even in Rome, long after the old gods had faded, children chased spiders and sang, "Spin your web, little girl, for Athena watches still." Of course, the meanings changed. Some saw her tale as a warning about pride, others as a triumph of truth over vanity, still others as a quiet rebellion, one thread at a time. Can you imagine her now, not in a dusty myth, but in the corner of your own ceiling? Tiny, delicate, relentless, still weaving, still choosing her own patterns. Historians still argue whether Arachne deserved her fate, whether her tapestry was blasphemy or bravery, whether Athena acted out of rage or sorrow or some strange divine respect. But perhaps the real question is not about gods and punishments at all. Perhaps it's about the power of ordinary things like thread and cloth and women who refuse to bow. Even here, perhaps in a way we're all still part of her loom. And if you listen just closely enough, you might hear the gentle shh of silk being spun even now.